Let's see. All right, yeah, let's just dive in. Well, welcome everyone. This session's called Bildung and Enlightenment 2.0 at the time of the fifth joint point. Joined by some familiar faces and friends here, but I'll offer some quick introductions. Each of these very wonderful people has a very interesting kind of perspective and angle in on these issues. And I think it'll become clear the points of contact and sort of the unique contributions each one's bringing. I'll try to frame that briefly, but for the most part, I'll be as unobtrusive as possible and just let these brilliant people go for it. So anyway, we've got three folks today on this panel. We got Brandon Norgaard, who is a developer of the Enlightenment 2.0, or let me Brandon sent me an official bio, which I can pull up here. But Brandon has been working a lot on the issue of the meta crisis, and has been basically working behind the scenes in pretty much every aspect of this kind of civilizational meta crisis issue, and has been doing some excellent work on that, and is going to be talking to us today a little bit about the intersection between the meta crisis and the kind of challenge and possibilities of AI and LLMs and that sort of a thing. So we'll get to that first, but next is Lena Rachel Anderson, who I had the great pleasure of actually getting to hang out with in person not too long ago at here at Sky Meadow Institute, where Lena came and worked with Zach Stein and presented on Bildung and education. Lena's work, of course, is kind of exploring the area of Bildung. She's a member of the Club of Rome and the co-founder of the Global Bildung Network. And of course, folks will know her books and her work. And then finally, we've got Robert Bunge, who's a Seattle area IT instructor, fourth generation Washingtonian, and he's working at the intersection of technology and global cultures and bringing a practitioner perspective to these topics. So yeah, I think we have a sense of the general frame here, and why don't we start this out with Brandon going first, and you can kind of yeah, frame specifically those issues that around the meta crisis and the AI element. And I think also you'll give us a sense of how the fifth joint point especially kind of factors into this element. But I'll let you take it away, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, Brendan, for that intro. And I also wanted to mention that I'm a grad student at the California Institute for Human Science, and I am a research director at the Enlightened Worldview Project. And so I have some slides here. Just a moment. And so you guys can see that it's like full screen for you, hopefully. Oh, it is now. Okay. So just here. Zoom puts stuff in the way for me. I hate how it does that. All right. So navigating the fifth joint point through Enlightenment 2.0 is what I want to be talking about here today. And what I actually want to start with is, what is a joint point? Now, we've heard Greg talk about this a lot. It's in a lot of the UTOK literature, but I just want to get a fine point on that so that we can understand what we're transitioning into. Okay. The tree of knowledge system features ontologically distinct planes of existence. These are nested information energy processing systems, each with their own complexity building feedback loops and evolutionary dynamics that transcend and include the planes from which they emerged. So we see matter, life, mind, culture, and there are joint points between them. These are the phase transitions between the planes wherein higher levels of complexification becomes possible. Okay, and what is the fifth joint point? So you can see that those are numbered there. Okay, so the fourth one is the justification systems theory, or JUST, which produced shared systems of justification, which are the narrative structures that give rise to our belief value systems This is manifest through our propositional networks, which provide human societies the ability to coordinate, to survive in varied environments, and to build all kinds of things, leading in due course to the accelerating complexification of our culture, person plane of existence. What is the next plane of existence? This is the emerging digital global plane. I don't believe that UTOK has an official name for this quite yet, but I saw that somewhere. Emerging digital global plane. This is made possible through meta cultural transition that we are now experiencing. This is a novel information energy processing and morphogenetic system that is layered on top of the existing justification systems that constitute our culture. This is made possible by recent development of AI systems such as LLMs, et cetera. There is a whole new level of adaptive complexity, and it is driven by a whole new evolutionary dynamic. This is not just driven by the sociocultural evolutionary dynamics that human civilization has been used to for millennia. As fast as our cultural evolution has changed in recent decades, recent centuries, okay, and then it gets faster and faster. In the recent decades, it's breakneck speed. Okay, this pales in comparison to the acceleration that is just getting underway as a result of the additional nested feedback loops afforded by the recent technological development, which are leading to ever more complex tech development. So it's technology creating technology. There's a family of sciences for each of these planes of existence. Okay, so we can see, psychological sciences, social sciences, which I try to specialize in. At least I'm a grad student studying a lot of this. But with what we're looking at here, this is a new family of sciences that is best understood as the cybernetics of information technology and human computer interaction, which transcends and includes human culture and IT. And so we should note, okay, this might be protopian or dystopian, and we have a choice in the matter. We need to recognize both the amazing potential and the serious threat of advancing AI technologies. We might be able to leverage these technologies to address some of our greatest civilizational challenges and threats, but as many have pointed out, these technologies bring enormous threats and risks of their own. There are hyper-capitalist and hyper-modern attracting forces that are pushing us toward dystopian plane that threatens the substrate in of the more foundational plane. So this plane is emerging. We don't know if it's going to, be a different kind of attracting force that then threatens what it's built on top of. We can feel this with our culture. It's being made more bland, and postmodern meaninglessness is epidemic. And there are serious threats to our natural environment and to life on Earth. And when more people hand more aspects of their lives to AI systems, and perhaps we are getting dumber in this as a society, and our civilization is more fragile, and these systems, these AI systems, getting smarter and smarter in certain ways. But perhaps the future doesn't have to be quite so bleak. So how can we navigate this transition to the fifth joint point? As Greg Henriquez says, our current state of the world is in a massive flux. And this is in part because we have generated these digital technologies and artificial intelligence systems that are dynamically interfacing with just about every aspect of our lives as cultured persons. This trend is going to accelerate and complexify in the coming years. So Greg has stated that the fundamental questions from a UTOK vantage point include: how will the technological aspect interface with the natural dimensions mapped by the TOK system? What kind of world will emerge from that interface? And what should we be doing about this? Greg has proposed what he calls WISE NAGI, which stands for Wise Natural Artificial General Intelligence. So rather than to fight against this artificial intelligence, we can find a way to have a wisdom in our integration with it. This is wisdom that is what would be naturally grounded, and that would recognize where we are in the wisdom stack. And I figure that this gives us the imperative to develop collective mindfulness of the dynamics that are at play at all levels of the tree of knowledge system, including all of the joint points, because that would give us a fighting chance of steering the metaculture of the digital global plane that is emerging and working toward a future that is just and sustainable and that respects human dignity. And these are values that often get buried as new technologies are deployed and hyper-capitalist forces try to, become even more wealthy and powerful, regardless of the collateral damage to people, to communities, to society, to the natural environment. Okay, so we have a chance, I figure. Okay, so now I want to recap a little bit of what I talked about last year at the 2023 UTOK Consilience Conference, and then merge that in to finish this out. What I talked about last year was Enlightenment 2.0. And so I focus a lot on the culture person plane as it was last year. So I'm not sure a lot of you guys maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't, but it's all on my YouTube channel. But the enlightenment gap is an essential element of UTOK, and it refers to the knowledge gap that emerged during the 17th and 18th century European Enlightenment. These knowledge systems never adequately define the field of psychology nor the concept of mind. These movements also fail to provide adequate, coherent, reliable, and broadly encompassing social sciences, which we need to understand the social sciences because something new is emerging out of that is distinct. So UTOK fills in the enlightenment gap by solving the problem of psychology and providing the TOK system to describe the relationship between matter and mind phenomena. Okay, and ultimately, it's going to find the difference between the culture that we're experiencing, this new metaculture. Okay, it also provides these elements such as the influence matrix, the behavioral investment theory, and the justification systems theory to provide a grounding for the social sciences, which will ultimately be important as well for something that's transcending and including the social sciences. Okay, so Enlightenment 2.0 can be seen as the convergence of the Western rational and Eastern spiritual enlightenment. And we can apply this not just to individuals, but we can deploy this broadly in our sociocultural sphere so as to promote greater wisdom in our educational, governmental, and economic institutions. For me, these what we call JI dynamics, that's justification, influence, and investment, it's an important part of this. So that's how those factors come together, what each of them are, and those are three of the the key ideas of the UTOK system. It's on that UTOK tree that he has. And those are really important for how social science emerges out of psychological science. So that's JI dynamics, I recognize that the emerging sciences that connect social theories to JI dynamics are an important part of Enlightenment 2.0. And so we need to have mindfulness of this. So just a moment. It's really important for how we navigate this transition. Okay, so what is investment? We need to look at what is it? What are these elements, these JI elements? Okay, so look at investment. This is where one decides whether fully deliberately or subconsciously or anywhere in between to expend some sort of scarce, conscious, mental, or embodied resource that we have in the present in order to open up possibilities for the future. Within lived conscious experiences includes time, attention, emotional energy, and mental effort. So we have scarce amounts of this. For example, your time is infinite. Lost time is not recovered. When you waste time on some activities, such as using these apps or whatever, you get nothing in return. This is irrational and can be harmful to your life. Same thing goes for your attention. You can focus your attention on anything you choose. Oftentimes you receive happiness or pleasure through focusing your attention towards certain things at any given moment. You are focusing your attention on something. And as these moments pass, there were always many other possible things that you did not focus on but perhaps you could have. So when you're focusing all your attention on these machines and they are grasping your attention, that is not necessarily a good investment. So what is influence? These are the factors that come into play when you decide how to act. There might be competing factors that are influencing your decisions. When you make a decision, it was because certain factors ended up having greater influence over you than others. In social situations, other people might have some influence over you, and you might have some influence over them. So the main influence factors in the influence matrix include love. There's a dimension for love, for power, and another one that is kind of related to the valence or pleasure and pain. And there's probably other factors as well. So what is justification? This is where one communicates using spoken or written language or some other forms of signs or symbols. And this is somehow derived from your needs, your desires. Under the justification hypothesis, everything one expresses to others and also their own sense of self comes from a form of justification. And this is understood to stand in relation to influence and investment. So I want to talk about Enlightenment 2.0 and the fifth joint point. Bringing this all together, we can develop greater individual and collective wisdom and navigate the fifth joint point into the emerging digital global plane through an Enlightenment 2.0 ethos. If we have mindfulness of Jai dynamics at multiple levels, that's the human interpersonal, the human group transpersonal, and the human machine interaction. And I think I'm sorry, just a moment ago, I meant to say human intrapersonal is important as well. Okay. And so this adds this element of human machine interaction and having those Jai dynamic mindfulness at that when we are interacting with these machines. If we do that, then we stand the best chance of overcoming the challenges and threats posed by the new technologies and leading toward a better future. So we should develop and maintain mindfulness of what is influencing us, what we are investing in, and how we are justifying within ourselves as humans, and also in relation to our AI tools or any other kinds of machines or apps. So imagine if, to the best of our ability, we could become mindful within the flow of our lives of the Jai dynamics within our own minds when we are interacting with machines, apps, AI systems. Imagine if we could do this as individuals, and we also had ecologies of practice that were deployed within organizations and institutions that would then be designed to keep us mindful of these factors during our daily lives. We have a choice, and we have the capability to be mindful of Jai dynamics, each of the elements in its own right, and how they interact within our own individual minds and within communities and within society. We can make use of AI tools to complement our enlightenment, and we can avoid harmful and pathological usage of AI tools as well. Thus, we can consciously choose to navigate this transition into protopia, rather than dystopia. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Awesome. And that gives us a wonderful framing, and appreciate your contributions always to this topic. I guess we'll save, again, the broader discussion for once everyone's gone. So we'll have a lot of stuff to work with. So let's jump to Lena next. Feel free, Lena, to
Thank you.
Take control.
Yes, thank you. I will just speak up. I didn't bring any slides this time. Thank you, Brandon, for clarifying and explaining the joint points and the model in this. I have not studied Greg's UTOK system in depth, but the joint points I find really useful, and I really appreciate that he has illustrated it in this way, that you have, the beginning of the universe, and then you have complexity in the physical world. And within that, there's something becomes biology, and that becomes more complex exponentially. And within that, there's something that becomes mind and becomes more complex within that. And then within that, there's something that becomes culture, and which becomes more complex within that. And within culture, somebody creates the computer and the internet, and now that seems to be complexifying exponentially, and that is where we are. And this is a completely new situation that we're finding ourselves in. And Um, and I'm here to talk about Bildung, and I'm also going to say something about psychology because Greg is out of psychology, and there's a lot of psychology going on around in this. And I actually think psychology might, as a profession, as an academic field, might be part of the problem. It could become part of the solution as well. But right now, and from hearing what has been said so far, or at least where I've participated this time, I do see some problems with it. But let me just clarify what I mean by Bildung, and it's not Bildung, it's Bildung, and the build in this word is the German word for image. So originally, Bildung was shaping yourself in the image of Christ. During the first Enlightenment, this religious worldview sort of dwindled away, and the concept of Bildung became uh, imagining yourself, shaping yourself in the image of that, becoming fully who you can be as you. So Bildung is the formation of your personal character and you as a person. And one of the very famous Swedish descriptions of Bildung is from the late 1800s by an educator named Ellen Key. And she said, Bildung is what is left when you have forgotten what you've learned. So it's a knowledge structure. It's a deeper understanding of the world where you may not know all the details, but you can see patterns and recognize things and see if they're kind of off or making sense and are culturally connected. So the way that I describe Bildung now, also to make it more tangible, and I don't like the word operational, but when we're discussing education and we're discussing how to grasp the times that we're in, I think it's useful to have a model or an explanation of Bildung that is less fluffy than it's what's left when you've forgotten what you learned. There are other and really good explanations of what Bildung is, but the one that I'm using now is that it's two different kinds of knowledge. The first kind of knowledge is the transferable kind of knowledge, and the other kind of knowledge is the non-transferable kind of. Excuse me. And the transferable kind of knowledge, from person to person or from teacher to classroom, we're pretty good at doing that in our school systems. It can be academic knowledge, such as math or science or learning a new language, or it can be practical knowledge, such as cooking a meal or baking a bread or knowing how to run a household, for instance. So we can transfer that kind of knowledge, and we can also test if the transfer has taken place. We can see if people can bake a bread, if they can speak the language they were supposed to learn, and it's a horizontal transfer from person to person. So I tend to call this the horizontal kind of knowledge, or the horizontal transfer of knowledge. And then the other kind of knowledge that we cannot transfer is life experience. So we can call that the vertical kind of knowledge. It's your depth of character, it's your emotional depth. And it's what comes from making mistakes and living life and doing stupid stuff and realizing it, or having successes together with others or on your own. It's your emotional development. And we can't transfer that. So if I'm in love and I am, all intoxicated by this, and I tell somebody that, oh, I just met this wonderful guy and I'm, totally in love and I can't stop thinking about him, and I tell it to somebody who's never been in love before, they'll just think I'm crazy, which you basically are when you're in love. But if I tell it to somebody who has been in love, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and there is a resonance. I cannot transfer the emotion, but if we share the experience or have had similar experiences, there's a resonance in the other person. And the same goes with making a complete fool out of yourself at work, or succeeding with something, or all these life experiences that shape our character. And there is one way where we can almost transfer emotions, and that's through the arts and aesthetics. And that's why it's so important that we have music, theater, great novels, art, paintings, dance, all that stuff, because that's where, whenever we have a really strong emotion and words are not enough, that is when we express ourselves aesthetically. And we do it, artists do it, but we all do it. When we can't express with words what it is we want to say, we do it in pictures, we do it in in dance, in music, in singing, in poetry. And if you're a creative soul, you can make new stuff. If you're not a really creative soul, you use something that other people have already produced, and then you either sing it or dance it or do something about it. I would say death metal, headbanging, playing air guitar is a way of perhaps getting some anger and frustration out. So you can enact these aesthetic expressions, even though you may not be a creative producer of it yourself. But if you're a great novelist or composer, you can take an emotion, put it into story, put it into music, and then when somebody, if you take Mozart, for instance, when somebody plays his music, the musicians develop in themselves or create in themselves some of the same emotions as he had when he was writing the music, and the people listening to the musicians can have some of the same experiences that Mozart had 250 years ago. So that's what we can do with aesthetics. And the more you have of this, the deeper roots you can create into your cultural fabric, and the richer your emotional depth becomes. And then there's the upbringing, which goes in the other direction, so to speak. And that's where we, particularly with children, but we also do it with each other and with adults from time to time. We tell people this is not how we behave here, or that was a really great way of saying that. You really nailed it, and everybody listened when you did it. So we still have this upbringing aspect even in adult age. But there's this vertical kind of aspect even to the way that we use the language. And the combination of the two kinds of knowledge is Bildung and the struggle with it. And so you can have a lot of knowledge about the world, transferable knowledge, and be very sort of shallow. You can be almost like a frisbee if you do not have a lot of emotional depth and nobody cared to give you moral norms and tell you how to behave around other people. But you can also have very little knowledge about the world and almost be like an American football, where you have a lot of emotional depth and moral character. You could be a, a, um, a grandmother in a small village where you've never been outside the village and don't really know very much about the rest of the world, but you may even be illiterate, but you have enormous emotional depth, and you have a lot of strong sense of morality and the social norms in your society. So Bildung can look in many ways, but a rounded personality that has both aspects of it, and where you've struggled with making it your own, the culture and the context that you're in, that is Bildung. And on the one hand, this is very individual because we're all born different. So we have different talents and different intelligence, different personalities and urges. And so whenever we hear something, whenever we experience something, it will land differently inside all of us. And so even though you're listening to me now and everybody's hearing the same thing, it will not land in the same way in you. Hopefully a lot of it will be the same, but it will all land in a different place and in a different way inside you. So it's very individual. But Bildung is also social. You can't grow as a person. You cannot become who you are in isolation. It's always an interaction with other people, with culture, with norms, with expectations, and with uh, uh, emotions together with other people. And when I've been listening to the other presentations here, and the more that I explore psychology and how psychology is used, for instance, in schools with social and emotional learning, and with mindfulness and meditation and learning about your emotions and how to handle stress and anxiety, for instance, and not just in schools, also in workplaces. Psychology sees the individual as a satellite, a solitary thing and not a relational thing. And instead of working with the person in context and working with the context, people are told to sort out their emotions and learn to contain the emotions and handle the emotions and take a deep breath and let the emotions go away. Instead of figuring out how do we work on this together? How do we solve the problem so that we're not miserable anymore? And so that's where I see some of the shortcomings of psychology, because it's really focusing on the individual mind, and it's not focusing on, and it's focusing on mental health, but it's not focusing on social health or a how the community is thriving. So I think that as we're in the fifth joint point, there are some things that we need to use psychology for, and then it has some shortcomings that I think that we need to take into account. Psychology is an analytical tool, and we can use psychology to understand humans, and for that matter, animals. Psychology comes into the world at the third joint point, I think, minded creatures, and then it's part of the human life and culture as well. So psychology can help us understand why we're behaving the way that we are. It can help us understand ourselves. It can also help us understand animals, and it can help us understand how we are interacting socially based on who we are and the experiences that we've had. But I don't think psychology is very good at being a lot more than that. I was just looking up the word therapy and to see what that actually means. It means healing. So psychology may also be used for a healing process, but that means that you have to be broken first. So it may help us understand pain if we're suffering from trauma. But I think there's a lot of language from psychology that has now seeped into areas where it doesn't belong and where it's not helping us solving problems, because they're Bildung problems and not psychological problems. And the psychologization, I don't know if that's even a word in English, of our language and of the way that we're looking at people, is creating a way of addressing social and societal problems as something that is wrong inside the individual. I just had a discussion with somebody yesterday on a slightly heated exchange in a chat, and the person came out of some kind of coaching or a psychology background, and wrote that there had I the reason for my anger would have to be some kind of psychological flaw, and I would say that my reason for being angry was because I found something morally wrong, not because there was something psychologically wrong with me. So I think the psychologization of um, understanding each other and where we're coming from and why we're saying the things that we're doing is gradually becoming um, a power abuse among the people who have the knowledge of psychology, and where it's being used for categorizing and analyzing other people rather than having a better understanding of why people are doing the way that why we are behaving the way that we do, and then handing over the solutions to um, how do we fix our problems and our social situations with some other tools. And that is where I think Bildung and this horizontal transfer of knowledge comes in, because we need a richer symbolic world to address the situation that we're in. And that's where the arts and the aesthetics come in. We need the arts to start exploring what is it that we don't have words for yet with regards to, for instance, AI and other technological development. Why are we, and it is part of what is making us human. And somebody actually said that on Facebook the other day, after somebody had shared a lot of AI created pictures, that this person didn't actually think believe in a human spirit until now, but now that they saw the spiritless art that is being created by all these generators of images, the difference between what the AI can create and what humans can create may actually be that kind of spirit. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think psychology is really important at the fifth joint point. It can help us understand ourselves, but it can also be abused. And it can particularly be abused if people are miserable or angry or have other sort of wrong emotions, because then you can use psychology as a way of um, bullying them into silence, and instead of having a meaningful discussion about, so how do we avoid this situation that is obviously making people miserable or causing anger, then we're using it for an analysis of the person or the people who have these emotions instead of dealing with the surroundings. And Brendan mentioned my trip to the US here about a month ago, and one of the things that I saw there, and we tend to do things in Europe 5 to 10 years later. Things that happen in the US, we tend to do those in Europe 5 to 10 years later. And for a while, I thought that we had sort of caught up because of social media and the technological development. But what I saw in the US, I'm really sorry to say this, is a society that is falling apart. And I hope that we're not going to go that way in Europe. I hope that we can stop that development. But I actually think that if we think that we can solve people's suffering with individual therapy and psychology and not address culture and uh, community and the greater society, the nation and the world, and how we are solving problems together, then we're going to have societies that are falling apart. And the wave of therapy. I mean, when I was a kid in the 80s, we were laughing at the Americans because they all had a shrink and they all went to therapy, and now we all do it here as well. And it doesn't seem to have solved the problems in the American society. So we need to do something else. And what I think we need to do is to have the horizontal transfer of knowledge so that we can better grasp what's happening and more people can grasp it better. And we need that vertical aesthetic, deeper roots, because it's a crucial part of our meaning making. And it is what allows us to actually communicate complex feelings to one another. If the only words for feelings that we have are happy and sad, it's really hard to describe how you're feeling, or angry and frustrated. But if we have many of those words that are in our poetry, or we have imagery that allows us to convey complex feelings and how the whole situation is to us, then we can actually have meaningful conversations about many of the problems that we're facing. And we're doing some of the stuff that is uniquely human. And part of the difference between Bildung and psychology is that when we talk about Bildung, we talk a lot about education, also that transfer of knowledge. And what we do in transfer of knowledge, what we do in education, is that we're meeting around the shared third. And in this case, I'll just use my computer mouse. So if I were to teach somebody about this, and if I were an amazing expert on computer mice, we would all be focusing on this thing together, and it would be a shared experience. We would have a shared third. And in this shared third, there is a democratic, equal relationship among us studying the same thing, even though I might be the expert. And that levels the relationship, and we can all be open to this discussion. If we're in a situation of therapy or coaching, we're not meeting around a shared third. One of us is the object for both of us, which creates an imbalance in the power relationship. And so there are more aspects and differences between education and psychology. But if we try to approach our current problems through therapy and through psychology, we're creating a power imbalance between the people who are in the know and the people who are either suffering or need to somehow change on the inside to handle the situation that they're in. If we're in an educational situation, if we're looking at the shared third, and the shared third could be why people are not thriving at the workplace, then we're there on equal terms and we can actually have a discussion about how do we solve this problem that makes everybody miserable. And that would be a Bildung process, and we would all learn the process. So these are some of the differences that are there. And to just round this up and end this on an illustration, I will say a little bit about what it means to have a shared culture, what Hegel would have called a shared spirit, and many of the Bildung thinkers would have called a shared spirit. And I'm just going to say one sentence. And when I say that sentence, I bet that inside your minds is going to be a certain character. There's going to be a certain kind of music. There's going to be a certain kind of aesthetics, certain kind of humor. And you're all going to have inside your mind images from the same thing, but of course differently because you're going to have different associations within the same framework. And the sentence is, the name's Bond, James Bond. And on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you. Lovely. Well, let's turn now to Robert Bunge. Take it away, Robert.
Thank you, Brendan. The name's spelled Robert, but I pronounce it Bob. So I've got a few slides here, although take a good look at my background because that's part of the presentation also. So bear with me while we do the Zoom transition. Okay, is everybody seeing my slides? Probably not, because I have to
see the
tell
slides.
them to go. You see them?
Yeah,
great.
But they're not full screen. There you go.
I see them too. All right, fabulous. So first of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be on this distinguished panel. I'm kind of like having mega imposter syndrome at the moment, so bear with me. So let's start with where I'm coming from. It's a view from somewhere. I grabbed that phrase because we're in a Habermas book club, and Habermas was critiquing views from nowhere as if it was an objective scientific, transhuman view from a godlike presence, and I don't have anything like that. So the opposite of a view from nowhere is a view from somewhere. You have a life, you're in a time and a place, in a body with a set of relationships, and that's how you see the world. So I happen to see it from a fairly interesting somewhere. I live closer to the mountain than to the Space Needle, but I work closer to the Space Needle. My instructional role for the last 20 years has been adult educator in information technology, including working programming and anything else. My student body, interestingly, is very global. I literally have students from 5 continents, a class of 20 or 30. I see people from all over the world on this Zoom call. Frankly, though, my student body is more diverse. To make this audience tantamount to my student body, I would have to increase the number of Africans and Middle Easterners. So that's kind of my life world in Habermas terms. That's who I deal with face to face on a frequent basis. So that colors my thinking about how culture, technology, and global futures. Also, with respect to economic, thematic concerns, I have very low students and very high income employers. And so there's some interesting polarities there. Okay, the reason that I'm here today was a couple years ago, having absolutely no knowledge of any of this from this conference, was dealing with a very practical issue at work, which was that the increasing demands for social justice approaches was starting to create friction and cognitive dissonance with my very much science technology field of computer science. And, borrowing UTOK terms for that, I think the core issue is what Greg calls the Enlightenment gap. Going back to Rene Descartes and others, that we split off fact from values. And so sort of fact technical based world of computer science didn't have a really seamless, obvious way to play with the values oriented world of social justice. I went searching through available educational literature of a generally postmodern flavor, and I didn't find anything really that gave me any traction on it. Things like decolonization theory weren't really speaking to computer science education in a very useful way. So I started opening the door to other influences. And I have sampled anything that on the surface is postmodern. As if the normal references aren't getting it done, is there anything more current? So I've been on a 2-year search for things that are more current. So that's how I got involved with a lot of different things. That includes global Bildung, that includes UTOK, that includes a lot of other things. What I'm taking away at a high level from all of that is it seems that the thought systems of the future need to have some sort of developmental or evolutionary vision. Obviously, we are a world in progress towards something. I'm also finding that siloed disciplinary work isn't adequate. So I'm interested in anything transdisciplinary, arch theoretical, integrative, holistic, pick your favorite terminology for that. And again, I believe we're on a trajectory toward a new worldview, or maybe multiple new worldviews, in a different sort of world system. It's the current world system, but there's obvious instabilities in how things are going now. Okay, let's just speak quick the whole question of, okay, well, if we're going to some new system, what is that? So Brandon gave a lot of treatment to the joint point idea, so thank you for that, and I won't restate that. The one thing I want to point out about the joint points is the newly emerged joint point never in any case prior has replaced what came before. So like life didn't eliminate matter. Mind did not eliminate life. Culture did not eliminate mind. Okay, so there's a lot of extremely apocalyptic sci-fi driven scenarios where the robots replace the humans. And that's the thing that we should be expecting, 5 or 10 years from now, if current trends continue. I would say that is inconsistent with UTOK thinking if we assume that the future in some sense resembles the past. Now, the other thing about UTOK joint points is they represent, in a sense, ontological levels of being. So it's more than just like some cool new invention or a new innovation within a particular, like a new species evolving or something within the field of life, or a new language emerging from culture. It's really like a new order of being. And there's a nice presentation yesterday featuring Bobby Azarian and a few others, which talked about this whole idea of a need for levels of being in terms of, gripping the big history of the universe. So if that is true, and I'm obviously in no point whatsoever to adjudicate it from an absolute stance, one would expect whatever a fifth joint point might be would in some sense take us beyond the world of previous historical culture. Okay, just to contrast that with a more technological view, so I'm citing Ray Kurzweil here, whose famous idea is the coming technical singularity. Kurzweil's argument for that is that there's been exponentially increasing innovation cycles going back to the printing press or earlier, And that if things keep going at that exact rate, we get kind of like a hockey stick innovation curve. And I think his prediction for the singularity is like 2020 or something, so you won't have to wait long. And this would be artificial generalized intelligence, along with nanotechnology, along with biotechnology, along with a lot of other things converging all at once, to the point that essentially technology becomes self-sustaining and doesn't need us that much anymore. The one thing I'll say about Kurzweil's epochs here, which are roughly parallel to joint points or various stage theories of history, is notice that Kurzweil labels his fourth epoch technology pure and simple, whereas UTOK would call it person culture. So, for me, I lean toward the UTOK view. Okay, I don't think technology fixes itself. And the reason I know that is I spent the last 20 years fixing everybody else's technology. And God, I wish the computer could plug its own keyboard back in, because I'm really tired of having to run around doing it. But, if any of you have ever called a help desk, you understand intuitively that humans are still in the mix. Okay, so that's why I teach people to, architect things on the internet, because people are still involved. But Kurzweil seems to have a somewhat overdeveloped view of technology and a somewhat underdeveloped view of humanity. So, take that for what it's worth. So I think, I'm not going to do a lot of sci-fi futurism here, speculating about what artificial intelligence is going to be in 5 years and what it's going to do and who's going to be replaced and all that. I'm just going to say, assuming that the future at least rhymes with the past, I don't really imagine technology is going to eliminate the need for human intervention. And then I'm also noticing at Kurzweil's higher levels, he implies some sort of human technology merger or symbiosis. So, people haven't gone away in his thinking. They just don't really show up big till toward the end. All right, and then more model of this type of thing. I got this from a doctoral thesis by a person named Kata Last, who's had some interactions with Greg Enriquez, so you can talk to Greg about that. But anyway, Last is sampling a lot of cybernetic research going back several decades, and he came up with this idea of a metasystem transition. Now, the thing about a metasystem transition is there's really three legs to it. There's an energy leg, which, if you think of previous metasystems transitions, that might help. That would be the transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural, or the transition from agricultural to industrial. Okay, so in each case, there was an energy upgrade involved, because you go from, native plants and animals to cultivated plants, which increases the energy intensity. With the industrial, you go to fossil fuels, which increases the energy intensity. Okay, there's also different information media at each point. So you've got, hunter-gatherer, you've got essentially verbal culture. With agricultural society, we have the advent of writing. With industrial society, we get the printing press, and then telephone, telegraph, and ultimately our current grid. And then, as we transition to whatever the next meta transition would be, the next meta system transition, internet obviously is the core information technology. And Last is projecting that needs to go along with renewables. And then also, because this is the cybernetic view, governance or control hierarchy is a big part of it. So, previously we had tribes and then city states and then empires and nation states. And so Last is putting something called the global brain in the category of what the governance is going to be. So the idea there is whatever something like the fifth joint point might be, it might involve the evolution of some sort of planetary governance, which, whether that's highly centralized or highly decentralized or highly regionalized, I don't know. There's a lot of potential models for that. So that's another way to look at it. So if you look at it from a UTOK standpoint, the idea is something big is coming. It feels like some kind of a major phase shift worthy of the term joint point. If you look at Kurzweil, he's absolutely just flat out predicting it, leaning heavily on a technology basis. If we follow this model, it's more of a holistic phase transition, but definitely something resembling more of a sustainable circular global economy with some kind of government and communication grid that would support coordinated, human or human machine synthesized action on a wide scale. So that's pretty much my futurism piece. I've got another small section on practitioner model in relation to this, but I don't know about you, but I'm dying to kind of synthesize what Brandon and Lena were talking about a little bit. And I would love to open it up to just some questions or responses right now. If people want to kind of unpack all this about fifth joint points or phase transitions or the coming robot takeover or whatever's on your mind. So I'll go ahead and open it up to just go do a hand raise or whatever. And Brendan, maybe you can be kind of the gatekeeper here a little bit. Also, I am monitoring chat. So if you want to post stuff in the chat, I'll sample some of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Yes, great. Awesome. I love the idea. Let's, I'm sure people have a lot to bring into this. Questions, feel free, just to use the reactions feature in Zoom. Just raise your hand. Let's move towards sort of some synthesis is all. But first of all, thank you all for your presentations. Those were great. And I think really between all of you give us a great lay of the land of this issue and its relationship to the UTOK framework and how that kind of helps us think about this moment that we're in. Go ahead. Feel free. Bob, if you want to keep an eye on the chat, though I will as well. In the meantime, if no one raises their hand, I would have a question to get us started with. So maybe I'll start with that, and then as people want to make any contributions. So, all right. So here's a question for all of you, I guess, is and I'll frame it as something that I am rather passionate about because I see the UTOK lens and I see sort of the broader conversation going on in meta-modern, polymodern, liminal conversation spaces, offering something of incredible value to what's otherwise missing from a lot of the discussion playing out about this issue, right? Like in my interpretation, I see people grappling with our current reality in many ways. They're obviously, witnessing the rise of AI and the sort of technological explosion that's underway. And however you want to frame that, there's clearly something that is that has a kind of momentum to it that people are feeling like this thing is taking off, and there's a lot of apprehension and anxiety about it. And then sort of the most, I would say, vocal and probably the most influential voices responding to all that are a lot of the transhumanist folks, right? Bob brought up Kurzweil, but now since Kurzweil, there's been this whole kind of accelerated, effective accelerationist end of things. And there's a certain kind of perspective here that, it does kind of lean very much into the notion, the narrative that technology will sort of take over and will sort of leave us in the dust. And one of the ways I see UTOK offering a really valuable insight. Well, no, actually, I won't even give my take. I would offer that as a question for you guys is, what do you think UTOK, maybe specifically, but other aspects of the conversation maybe bring to this issue that you see otherwise being left out? And that doesn't have to be UTOK. It can be Bildung, which I appreciate because I probably tend to say Bildung, or it could be other things, right? So what is this conversation bringing to this issue that you think is vital? And if you had the ear of maybe the big cats in Silicon Valley, you'd want to add into their headspace.
Brendan, can I ask a question?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to pose that one first.
And answer your question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Go for it.
By asking that question. I posted a kind of long question to Bob in the chat, but to build on what you're saying, and I'm also fairly new to UTOK in terms of all the details of the system, but in the general sense, I'm pretty sort of four decades into the whole consilience game, right? So, and every bit, like Bob said, of every bit of that I've explored on 4 continents. And the real thing for me is that if UTOK was married to UTOP, which is a unified theory of practice or process, we would get the praxis. When I look at what Lenny was saying, if building is nothing else, it's about genius, which is what Brian Eno referred to as the social form of genius. And the real issue is, and this is where UTOK language and concepts come in quite handy, is how do we get a real grip to deal with what seems to be, and I think it's, by the way, I think it's all American bullshit, the VUCA world and chaos, and it's all difficult, and the fear that permeates that society and also many other societies right now, because mass individualism is collapsing. And there's no commons, and we're destroying our natural commons, let alone our social commons, right? But that approach is destroying that. And we're resisting here in Europe, of course. But for me, the issue, and this is what Lenny said quite correctly, is that psychology, and particularly, and I understand why people get angry about Ken Wilber, because Ken is an ultimate individualist. I know the guy very well. He's written a foreword to one of my books. Lovely guy. But Ken doesn't get anything about the social dimension. He's slightly Aspergery in that sense. And I think, a lot of Aspergery, a lot of geeks, people who just look at facts, figures, numbers, patterns. They don't look at values. And the axiology and the ontology and the hermeneutics, epistemology, blah, 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 it all goes together, because in action, we realize, as Lenny was saying, and that's absolutely right, in the arts and in the sciences too, let's not keep these things separate. The beauty of this whole game is that we're bringing these two cultures together, and we need the genius to do that. And whether it's the Habermasian dialogue or whatever, I mean, I've been working on that stuff my whole life as a strategist, facilitator, transformation artist, whatever. It's bloody difficult because the postmodern approach is shutting down a lot of stuff, right? But it's too dangerous because all this trauma, right, pops up and it's triggers. So you really struggle with the situation in Copenhagen and in Oslo and beautiful places that I love, Helsinki and those Scandinavian cultures. There's a embedded cultural understanding. If we don't do this together, we're fucked. We don't survive. I mean, when it's minus 40 degrees outside, right? So those cultures have evolved fundamental way of dealing collectively with these problems. And where you find other cultures that are highly individualistic, they haven't, and they don't know what to do. And it becomes polarized and messy and horrible. So bottom line is unified theory of practice. We need a process and we need infrastructure. If we're going to implement AI and develop global brains, we need a social learning process that's ethical and also objective. The third, whatever you called it.
Shared third.
The
shared third.
Yeah, we need the shared third in there. That is it's not always 100% objective, but at least it's a common reference point for us to explore and learn together in a fairly mutual appreciation, networky, a tolerant way, yeah, with a lot of compassion. Because if there was one thing missing from AI and geeks and American society, it's compassion. I mean, I just don't get any compassion, generally speaking, except for a few wonderful individuals in the West and East Coast that I know very well, and maybe some people in Austin. But the rest is just like a giant shopping mall, and football stadiums and huge office towers with cubicles. Anyway, I'm done on that one. So,
I
Robert,
would
David, you
actually
have your
like
hand
to.
up a while. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Yeah, I just see David's had his hand up for a while, so I wanted to get to him. And by the way, if you're getting excited to hear what I say about stuff, just put it in the chat because I'm blogging over there too while all this is going on.
Okay, yeah. Do you want
I
to
would actually like to
go ahead?
Yeah,
to answer
let's-
that because
it'd be
there's
a good
also
idea
a
if we could
there's
all
also
address-
a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Lena.
There's also a question in the chat, which is what was it that I saw in the U.S. that tells me that the U.S. is falling apart? And it's hard to say that it was like one thing, but there are a couple of things that I saw there, and I think they connect to the fifth joint point. And one of my really big sort of I kind of knew it, but I hadn't seen it and been in it was when I drove through what I would normally call small town America. I was in Tennessee, and this small town America was like one big 6-lane freeway through a number of huge fast food stores, pharmacies, and churches, and I couldn't find the grocery stores. And one of the big things right now in city planning and societal development is the 15-minute city, which means that within 15 minutes, you should be able to either walk or bicycle and do your day-to-day things like work, grocery shop, go to the dentist, all that stuff. And I was thinking of that as I drove through this small town in Tennessee, where it's like, okay, you could walk from Wendy's to McDonald's in 15 minutes, but you couldn't walk past the pharmacy to the church in the next 20 minutes because I mean the distances are so big. So the love affair with the car in the U.S. and that individualism, it's literally out there. And with climate change and with what we need to do with the fossil economy, that was one aspect of a country that I see falling apart because you're going to have not just a fight over. I mean, we're talking about green tech and stuff in Europe, but we have all these nice cities where you can actually bicycle within 15 minutes. I live in one of them, and it's not a thing. It hasn't become a conspiracy theory in the United States, and I see it with Jordan B. Peterson. I know he's a Canadian, but it's like, oh, they're going to make an open air prison where nobody is allowed to move more than 15 minutes away from their home. It's like, where on earth did that come from? And for me, that is a lack of Bildung. I mean, it's a lack of horizontal transfer of freaking knowledge about how do you develop a city and what do we need to do with fossil fuels and cars. And then the vertical development of the emotional depth that allows you to not be so emotionally dependent on the combustion engine so that you can actually have a different kind of cars if you do need to have small towns that are, I don't know, 40 miles on, well, probably not, 15 to 20 miles in one, end to end, but with a 6-lane freeway in it. On the other hand, there's a lot of low-hanging fruits there because you could just turn all those parking lots into urban gardening, and you can actually create some really cool with all of that land, and you already have the infrastructure for it. But it's just telling me that there is something that is socially dysfunctional, that is educationally dysfunctional, that is emotionally dysfunctional, and then you have the fifth joint point where we not just have AI and computers changing the circumstances, but also what kind of energy that we need for this. So there's some structures in society and some social issues and some cultural issues, and then there are the emotional, personal issues. And that's why I think the psychology can just deal with a little part of this, and we need a much bigger conversation about an understanding of human meaning making and how we thrive socially and how we're making sense of the world. And so if we're talking about a meaning crisis, and I absolutely think there is a meaning crisis, if the answer is, I mean, I heard the previous presentation with Greg Henriques, and where he was hosting, and there were 3 speakers. If the way that the meaning crisis is addressed is by looking inside yourself and figuring out how the mind works and the everything that is not the mind is just, I mean, the spirituality they're talking about is mind and not mind. It is not mind, tradition, community, being together, family relationships, interaction, economy, society at large, rule of law, and human rights, all that stuff that actually goes into your possibility for sitting in a corner and meditating and knowing that nobody's going to come and take your house away from you because you can't pay your bills. So we need to have a much bigger perspective on this in order to actually allow people to thrive.
Awesome. Much more could be said about that, and maybe we can come back to that. But I do know that David has had their hand up for a while. So you want to go ahead, take yourself off mute, David, and ask your question?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. First off, I want to say all three of you have touched a lot of different pieces of this. And I mean, at any point, I could have stopped somebody and, wanted to absorb what I was hearing and try to integrate it. But this is okay because it's all being recorded and I can look at it later. But then I'll be all alone without anybody to ask a question of, to help me out of the pit that you probably dropped me into. I'm just kidding. There's a lot to joke around with here. Yeah, so thank you first. There were several places, but the one that Leah just kind of kept touching it several times with her comparison about Europe. They used to laugh at us because we were doing therapy. Why do you need therapy? Now they're in therapy and we are in social collapse. Oh, you got to follow us, Leah. You got to go this way. I mean, this is the track for humanity, I think, and you're just behind us. No, I'm just joking again. I hope. But your observation about the tension in psychology of attributing to your sense of justice. Hey, I'm angry because there's injustice out there, and the complexities of the media world leave a lot of confusion there. Like, are you actually reacting to injustice, or are you watching the wrong media and they're getting you all hyped up? So there's the physiological trusting your feeling about your anger is justified, and you having a sense of yourself enough to say, I'm going to listen to that. I want to know why I'm so upset, as opposed to psychology. And I would say even a lot of media and naysayers about lots of issues. Oh, you've got a mental issue. That's why you're so angry. So I just want to thank you for that. But I know I would be thanking all of you for big pieces. But I can't address all of them. I will, I want to, but I do want to say something else. Just one other thing. As I observe everybody on Zoom, some people going to chat. Now, I don't really go and monitor chat because it distracts me from trying to listen to what I'm hearing. But it would be great if there are a lot of people working on the new technologies, trying to create the technology without just visual and auditory, and with the very limited, controls of, well, I can mute myself or not. And then I can raise my hand if I want to talk. And then will I get called on? All these things are severely limiting. I would really love to have something at the bottom of every person's screen where I can tell what emotional state they're in as they listen to all this. I have no idea. I've got lots of images, but I can't tell how anybody feels on this thing. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rant, but I'm sure I may have given Leah something to address there. Leah, could you help me out?
Not Leah, but Lena, but that's okay. I don't know if I can help you out on this. If I'm going to share my mood, I would have to say I'm in a really good mood right now. It's a great group of people, and I'm really happy to talk to you. And other than that, that thing about the therapy, it's really interesting because it was along with the therapy was the first plastic surgery wave of plastic surgery. We're making jokes about that too, and now we have that as well. So there's something about, and this goes actually into how we're modifying humans, and where it used to be that you had the body that if not God, but then your mother and your dad gave you, and there were limitations to what you could do with that body. And now we have technologies and medications that allow people to. There's gender. There's cats. I saw somebody who wanted to be a lizard. There are all kinds of things you can do to your body, and I really appreciate that we have good vaccines in the case of a pandemic, for instance. But there are a number of choices and options that I think are actually making people more miserable than happy because now you have a choice, and so you can actually make a mistake. And I would say the same thing with, for instance, pregnancy. And it's not just that you can have an abortion if you don't feel like you should have the child. There are so many options to find out what kind of a child are you expecting. And so you have to decide if there is some indication of, for instance, Down syndrome or other things about this child that may not fit into your concept of a healthy child, or you have to make a choice about what kind of life am I willing to bring into this world and take responsibility for, which is a huge question. And we can decide, know in advance whether there's going to be a boy or a girl, and you can decide if you have in vitro fertilization. You have a number of other questions that arise. So with these new technologies and new options, there are so many different choices that we're not ready to deal with. And we don't have a culture that allows us to have a meaningful conversation about this. And it's really, really hard to be the individual woman who has to make a choice about some of these things. But there are also other health issues where the options come with a number of dilemmas, and these technologies have evolved so fast that we don't have moral norms for it. We don't have language for it. It's really hard to discuss it, and so all these new technologies are posing new questions, and so we need new understanding and different kinds of culture around it.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted. There's a bunch of stuff going on at the moment. Want to make sure we can get to all of it. A couple of questions were asked, and so I also do want to come back to those and give people an opportunity to chat about them. But also, before we do that, Bob, you wanted to share 2 more or 3 more slides quick and to throw that into the mix before we keep going on, if you want to do that.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. So thank you, everybody, for the Q&A to flesh out the picture about what the problem situation is in the world right now. I'm going to wrap it with 3 slides on, from a practitioner standpoint, what can we do about it? So I got 3 ideas. The first of which I borrowed directly from Global Bildung, which is you can start from a centered point of view, namely be from somewhere. Be who you are. And then engage not just with your own ego psychology here, but hey, how about your family? How about your life world, your peer group, the people you work with, the people you see in your community, and then, larger affiliations beyond that. So my particular way of resolving things like diversity, equity, inclusion is I'll let anybody have their personal identity. all I would invite them to do is try to make it bigger by reaching out in other directions. Okay. Trying to get my advance button to go. There it is. Next up. Now, I've been working with Robin Lincoln Wood lately on what I believe is an excellent action research model. Although I got involved with that because I've been loving action research models all the way along. On the fact value split, the idea is you have to integrate both of them in your feedback loops. So like on this model, one strategy really starts from a values orientation, which I would say is something you get kind of from your own gut and your own life. And then as you go around clockwise on the model, it gets more into fact-driven things until ultimately at the end, you've got metrics and big data assessments and analytics and feedback that feeds into your strategy. So then when you strategize in the second round, it's your values again, but your values interrogating a wider world, excuse me. So what you get out of this is sort of a hermeneutic circle that just keeps growing. So that's on a practical level how I'm addressing fact values. It's a both and kind of thing, but working in an intimate relationship one with the other. And then finally, probably my own secret sauce on practitioner. I'm all about networks of networks, which I got from teaching internet for 20 years. So I hang out in everybody's social media space. I post in Global Bildung, I post in UTOK, I post in Brendan's Facebook. I get a lot of stuff from UTOKcon24, which Brandon put me onto. In fact, Brandon put me onto most of these. There's a lot of people there architecting futuristic versions of the internet that are not hyper-capitalist and more human-friendly. And moreover, I cross-fertilize all these. I've introduced people from one of them to other ones, and I introduce my friends to my friends, and I do that kind of thing. So I'm creating kind of my own global information grid that's sourcing ideas and best practices from all over the place. And this latest one in the circle is a local Tacoma community group, which is my hometown going back 4 generations. And they had taken an interest in this conference and in global Bildung and all the rest of it. So just to summarize what I'm all about, I'm using Habermasian discourse ethics to frame these discussions. In other words, you can come from whatever tradition you come from, as long as we're agreed to ground rules that we're going to share respectfully our differing perspectives. What I'm doing on social media mostly is fitting that into these huge, big history frameworks. So I could give you like a couple quick paragraphs on the history of the universe and why it led to this conversation right now. I have absolutely no respect for intellectual boundaries, and I'm mashing up everybody's system all in the same blender. But on a practice level, I'm going very local, very in my neighborhood, very ecological, but I want to stay networked to everybody else in the world who's up to the same sorts of things. So that's what I do for praxis. I'd love to hear what anybody else is doing, and I'm open to better ideas because that's the best I've got now. Hopefully I'll have a better one by this time next week.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, let's open that up to praxis questions and get any responses on that. Before we do that, real quick, Brandon, did you have any thoughts that you just wanted to respond to in terms of anything that's been asked or said so far? We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, and it would be related to the praxis question and also the question that you asked, about 20 minutes ago about like if you were in Silicon Valley and you were looking at, these people who are so, often in their own little world with blinders on, and they're, extremely intelligent in certain ways with regard to technology, but really just completely missing the culture and, the human interaction. They just don't see things, and they are driving things, the way that we end up living, so much. So what would we do? And then, I was Actually, I was there with Lena a couple months ago, and we were actually walking around some of those big buildings. I guess we didn't manage to get any time with those big executives there, but we were talking about Bildung, and here's what I think we could do. Somehow we might actually be able to work some influence networks and find a way to connect with some of these people and we could tell them little bit more about UTOK, just the broad outlines of the stack that we're living in, and the substrate of life and the mind, and how culture is dependent on that, and some of the broad outlines of that we only have so much time and emotional energy, and the factors that influence us and the ways that we're justifying. So it wouldn't just be GI dynamics. Actually, further down the stack, Brendan, is what you were talking about with energy and metabolism, in some of your talks. So those are key ideas. I know that the UTOK system, it has some key ideas, and several of those, the TOK system refers to how the stack as a whole. And then some of those other key ideas are so much psychologically based. But to drive off what Lena was saying about how we tend to psychologize so much, and I tend to think actually that we could have key ideas for each of these planes, and I'm not sure how mechanistic. Maybe I'm just like kind of a mechanistic kind of thinker. I want to have some sort of mental models, so that would work, I think, for people who kind of think like me. And others who are into technology, but to also see not just that you're seeing that technology space, but you're seeing the human interaction space. So you want to develop technology that makes that possible, or that enhances that side of things, in addition to solving problems that we need, or maybe that we don't. A lot of times the technologies don't necessarily solve problems; they just hog our attention. But that's what they can think of it in terms of that. If you kind of see what I'm saying, is that they're being mindful of that whole stack of life, mind, culture, and also what is going on within each of those planes, and how can we develop technologies, and how can we. I think it's very, very important is to have these cultural practices that we get ingrained into our interaction, that help us mediate and have an optimal relation to the technology. But it would be great if those, the people who are working in those companies would do things, would be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a confluence or a movement in this conversation towards the issue of praxis and practice and sort of problem resolution. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and we can explore that a little bit. Dustin Barrington had a question, put it in the chat, and I'll read it, but you can also come off mute if you want to pose it directly. I think it relates to the same thing, asking about the intersection of character development and the ability to move from concept to practice. Do you want to say more about that, Dustin, to ask that directly, or?
Well, actually, you framed it very well, Brendan. It's nice to see you guys. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm staying grounded by actually doing landscaping while I'm in the consilience here. Nice. But so we've got in Bildung, I think that there is a very important component of character development that operates at a individual level, but also we have, we have cultural issues. They're almost like a fractal representation of character at a collective level. And some of the things, like when we just sit down, we can talk about these ideas, but then we come around to think about, okay, well, how practical and how accessible are these things? Sometimes, like what Lena was talking about just a little bit ago, Europe might be farther ahead and actually be a place where some of these things could be implemented. And in rural America, it might not be as available to us. So how do we work with the intersection of, character development at a personal level and that almost character development at a cultural level to be able to move this personally and collectively?
Good question.
So I think it starts with the practicality. I'm very happy that you're doing gardening. So I doubt that you can do character development with a focus on the person, and that's why it's so important to have that shared third, because it's around something that you can make mistakes and have good conversations about what we should have done. And if you have a culture, and I think the whole uh, the way that capitalism works is that you always want to climb and be on the top. And that was the other thing that I saw in the US, because you can, and I saw that also when I was there 25 years ago, you can never relax in the US because there's no safety net. So you're in a constant state of anxiety and competition. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Europe, even other parts of Europe that are not as uh, deeply embedded in social welfare systems as the Nordic countries. The worst case scenario is it may suck, but it's not that bad. Worst case scenario in the US is really terrifying. So there's a level of anxiety that I think people constantly feel in the US that we don't feel here. And that makes a huge difference. And you can only have that sense of shared commitment and solidarity if you educate for it and have the Bildung for it. And somebody said something about how do you develop that sense of responsibility for the global world and not just your closer circles. You do that by going out and meeting people and getting to know them and realizing that, oh, these people are actually nice. I completely disagree on some of it, but they bake good cakes, or they're very helpful when something. So, and that is also how you learn to appreciate the environment and protect the bees and the waters and stuff like that. Because if you only know nature from the internet or television and you've never seen the ocean and you don't know how, I mean, if you don't have a sense of nature, you don't understand why it's important that we have bees. You may understand it intellectually, but you won't miss them when they're not there. So we need to encounter the world, and that is where the personal growth happens. And particularly, and I'm so happy Robert Bob mentioned Paulo Freire. You begin with the students, and you begin with their life world and what it is that is nagging them, and where they have a sense of urgency, and that is where you, as a teacher, as an educator, can then show them things that they didn't know existed, or show it from a different angle so it challenges them. And again, the shared third. If we talk about the character development, and if we keep talking about ourselves or each other, one of us or several of us, it can also be in a circle. Then we become the object of our own attention. And it's not as, I mean, that might be important. I'm not ruling out that it can be useful, but it's usually more useful to actually meet around the shared third and solve something together. And I also think that working together with other people is one of the most foundational human needs, and it just makes us happy to create something with other people and see that we made a difference together. And that can be gardening, or it can be cleaning, or it can be cooking. I mean, anything practical that you do with other people tends to be highly rewarding. And that's when you can also have some of the hard discussions and conversations about life and the trouble that you're in, because you can easily switch focus when you feel that it gets a little too sensitive. So there's a lot to be said for that. With regards to technology, I would be absolutely thrilled if people who are in a position among colleagues or local community and could say, for instance, on Friday, we'll conclude half an hour earlier. Everybody brings a cup of coffee, and I'm going to show you something. And then you show them the joint points. And then you have a conversation about that. I mean, if you're in a position to change the topic and bring this in, that would be amazing. And that would be a shared third that you could then discuss. And hopefully people would then go out and say, what was that all about? And what is that thing about the singularity? Or what is this artificial intelligence actually going to do in a broader perspective? Because the media tend to just show it in these little sound bites where we get the concrete examples, and it doesn't really give us the big picture. It doesn't allow people to see how big this really is and fundamental for who we are as a species.
Bob or Brandon, did you want to add anything to that question around character development and praxis?
Yeah, Robin Lincoln Wood just pitched me a private chat that he says, action research includes character development. And yeah, I'm buying that. In the sense that that's kind of the Paulo Freire thing too, and a lot of these other things. They're very iterative. So you start where people are at. So if it's like in Tennessee and they drive 20 minutes to the store and 20 minutes the other way to church, all right, well, you sit down and have coffee with them and a piece of pie and you talk about life and take it from there. And by the way, if you want an American example of that, let's drop the name Miles Horton. That was Miles Horton territory. So read Horton's books and what he did for the world, and you'll get a picture. Okay. So yeah, if you're expecting everybody to like move to the West Coast and, work for a tech company before they get Enlightenment 2.0, I wouldn't recommend that. I'd say let's start where people are at. Take it from there.
It seems to me, though, interesting just to drill down on before I say anything, Brandon, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to throw into this specific issue?
Yeah. So like on character development, I heard someone earlier say, the rest of the US is like a big shopping mall or something like that. So I want to think about, how we can be mindful of some of these major factors. And one of them I think that is really important is, the class divisions and also, being mindful of these influence factors. So what's influencing me? How is it that we are so much being oriented toward this consumerist culture? How can we have this character development, collectively in communities to get us away from that? And so there are, some cultures, some subcultures, some geographic regions in the U.S. are, slightly more, I guess, advanced than others. Or although some of them are, they've got their own pathologies, and we need to have those sort of processes, I think, to try to get in and to try to improve the culture, to work on this, character development at the community level.
I would like to add something actually, which was also related to the U.S. falling apart, which is that at my trip, I visited different parts of the country and I met with different groups of people. And one of the places, it was a sort of a very woke, what I would normally have assumed was progressive group of people. And what I heard was people speaking in slogans. So instead of actually having a meaningful conversation about a tough topic, it was the replies came in like snap, snap, snap answers that I could have found in memes on the internet, which means that people had all the right opinions, but they were not capable of expressing them in their own words. And it was really hard to have a real conversation because you were just up against memes, really. And I did what I could to puncture some of them. But to me, that shows also a failure of an educational system where the teachers, where you're teaching to the test and you're not really interested in what people are learning, but you're interested in can people pass the test. And where there is not an open-ended discussion in the educational system, rather there's a learning of the right answers and an ability to reproduce them. So if you have an educational system that is set up like that, you're producing not everybody, but a lot of people who come out and speak in memes, and that's dangerous, because you, first of all, you can't have a real conversation, and second, you cannot be wrong in that company, because then you're dismissed uh, in a different kind of way than if you just happen to disagree. So yeah, those another thing that I saw. And I may come in different, I mean, be in different circles here, but I haven't experienced it like that. But I get we have some of the same here. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to name a few things that I was also hearing kind of implicit in some of this as well, which is when we're on the praxis level and when we're talking about a social safety net, that needs to be implemented. So there's a political component to that. When we're talking about suburban sprawl and just the domination of the automobile, then we're talking about zoning laws, right? And like that's a political issue. When we're talking about a broken education system and people not making good sense of reality based on that, that's a political issue in terms of how we change the institutions and the policies that go into all that. And so a lot of this also implicitly, to me, points to like very real, on the ground kind of grassroots, potentially like institutional change that requires political action. And so whenever we come to the praxis or practice issue, that to me just continually rears its head. And it's always also met with, at least in my heart, as a bit kind of dispiriting, because who wants to do that? it's so kind of such a discouraging process, but it's actually so necessary. And the other interesting way I think that these conversations, when they get to the issue of practice, also tend to pan out is that because we're systems and networking thinkers, everything's related to everything else. And so to address the education issue, requires like the food that we eat to be addressed, requires, the zoning, requires all these things. And that can be itself incredibly daunting. And it's not therefore confusing why a lot of people then turn towards more individualistic modes of, leverage that they can have on the system, because that might seem the only area they actually have any power to make an impact. And also itself is, I think, a meaningful, like a legitimately meaningful point of contact with the rest of the system. But Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in quick here. So on the theme of ecologies of practice, or the difficulty of getting into a praxis space, a real key linchpin is something I just joined about a month ago called Meaningful Conversations Tacoma, which is it's a conversation group with a spiritual center, and it delves into things like social safety net on a local basis. So it's sort of that integrated package, highly localized, which I consider sort of the seed corn of transformation. If we could get that replicated all over the place, I think that would start pointing things in a better direction.
Yeah. We got just a couple of minutes left. So anyone want to offer anything else? Maybe a quick question to any or all of our wonderful panelists. If not, we're probably close enough to time, but I would also invite our panelists, if there's anything final that you'd like to throw into this conversation, which has been really riveting and fascinating, to do that if you'd like at this point. Anything that you feel like maybe we didn't get to touch on, or you just want to gesture towards as also being an important part of this issue.
I would like to pick up on something that Brandon said in his presentation about the East and West. Actually, my first series of books in Danish, but they were called Both and, Both in Danish. And the both and that I was talking about is that we need both the Western tradition and the Eastern tradition. And the Western tradition has the either or, very much from Aristotle. A cannot be and not be simultaneously, so they're separate, whereas yin and yang, the Eastern philosophy, brings the opposites together and they create a whole, and so they're seen as a whole together. And the consequences of these two ways of perceiving the world or describing the world is that in the East there's a systems thinking, there's a way of seeing how things are interrelated, and the individual is generally seen as part of the group, whereas in the West we see discrete individual items and individuals, which means that we can actually have individual rights and human rights, and of course we need that. It is as an individual you suffer under torture, for instance, if the collective takes precedence over the individual. You can torture people. So we need both perspectives, and so we need both the both and the either or in order to make sense of the world, and so we can learn from each other. So that would be my comment on that particular thing.
Thanks. And Brandon, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, just real quick. I was actually wanting to read those books by you, Lena. I know that they're only in Danish, and unfortunately, my grandfather only taught me a few words of Danish, some folksy rhymes, and never progressed beyond that since he passed away in 1989. But I guess that's the best we can do right now to read your books. We have to learn Danish and all 30 something vowels or something that's a lot of vowels.
I just want to add to this that Morgan Freeman, he learned Norwegian to be able to read Henrik Ibsen's plays. So there's a role model there.
I also might, in the context of this conversation, suggest that maybe there are certain protopian futures provided by things like AI that can do things like translate Lena's books in a fairly cost-effective way for those of us who would
I was just about to suggest something like that, but I didn't get around to it.
Well, that seems like a good place to end. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Brandon, Lena, Bob. Wonderful. And thank you, everyone who attended. And thanks for your questions. This will be recorded if people do want to return to it and digest it and integrate it. But for now, we'll say adieu. So Godspeed, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the UTOK Consilience Conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.